I want you to picture the most uncomfortable moment of your entire adult life. Maybe it was something you said at the wrong time. Maybe it was walking into a room you were not supposed to be in. Whatever it was, I promise you it was nothing compared to what happened to me on a Friday night at a restaurant called Marcello's, when I looked up from a menu and felt my stomach drop completely through the floor. I had not wanted to go on this date in the first place. Daniel had been pushing me for weeks. Ever since my divorce finalized 2 years ago, he had appointed himself some kind of unofficial manager of my personal life, dropping hints about people he knew, forwarding me profiles I did not ask for, sending long voice messages at odd hours about how I needed to, and I am quoting him directly here, "Get back out there." I told him every time that I was fine, that I was not ready, that the last thing I needed was to sit across from a stranger at a dinner table and try to be interesting for 2 hours. Daniel did not care. Daniel never cares about things that inconvenience his plans for other people. So when he finally wore me down and I agreed, I told him very clearly what I was looking for. Someone calm. Someone with their life sorted. Someone with zero connection to anything complicated in my past. 3 simple conditions. That was all I asked. I got dressed that Friday in a white button-down and dark trousers. I drove to Marcello's, which was a nice enough place, soft lighting, white tablecloths, the kind of restaurant where the bread arrives before you ask for it and the waiters introduce themselves by name. I was shown to a corner table. I sat down. I picked up the menu. I told myself this was going to be fine. Then I got that feeling. You know the one. It is not a sound or a sight. It is something in your body, deep and wordless, that sends up a signal before your brain has anything to work with. My eyes went to the door almost on their own. And there she was, Patricia, my ex-wife's mother, standing in the entrance of Marcello's in a deep burgundy wrap top, one hand smoothing the front of it, eyes moving slowly across the dining room with the kind of calm focus that had always made me feel like I was being quietly evaluated. She looked exactly as she always had, composed, unhurried, like someone who had made every decision for the evening long before the evening started. I did not breathe. My first thought was that I was seeing things. My second thought was that she was meeting someone else, a friend, a colleague, anyone in that restaurant other than me. My third thought, which arrived approximately 1 second later, was that the hostess was already walking her across the room and heading directly toward my table. My table. I watched the chair get pulled out. I watched the menu get placed down. I watched the hostess smile and say with complete innocent happiness, "Enjoy your evening together." The word "together" landed between us like something fragile dropped on a hard floor. Patricia looked at the hostess, then at the candle, then at the white tablecloth, then at me. Her face moved through several things at once.
Surprise.
Recognition. A very specific kind of disbelief that goes beyond ordinary shock and into something that resembles the feeling of reading a document twice because you cannot accept what it says the first time. "This is not right," she said. Her voice was completely level. It was the voice of someone who had decided the situation was incorrect and was simply stating that fact. I could not argue with her. I barely had words. I sat there with my fork still in my hand and my mouth slightly open like a person whose brain had stopped mid-sentence. We figured it out in about 90 seconds. Same restaurant. Same evening. Same table booked for 2 at 7:30. Daniel had arranged my end. Her friend Susan had arranged hers. Neither of them had shared a single detail that would have allowed either of us to prevent this from happening. We pulled out our phones at the same time. My screen lit up with a message from Daniel. "I know," it said. "I know. Just stay. 1 hour. Please." I looked up. Her screen was lit too. Susan, I assumed, was sending something very similar. "Your friend Susan," I said. "Your friend Daniel," she said. "We are going to have a very serious conversation tomorrow," I said. "Susan and I," she said quietly, "are going to have a longer one." That was when Marco arrived. Marco was our waiter, and Marco had decided within 10 seconds of approaching our table that we were the most romantic story he had witnessed all month. He introduced himself with tremendous warmth, described the specials with the enthusiasm of someone announcing something wonderful, and asked if we were celebrating anything this evening. No, we both said at the exact same moment. He did not believe us. He left 2 glasses of water and a basket of warm bread and disappeared with a smile that suggested he knew better. Patricia sat down. I was not sure if it was a decision or just a physical response to the strangeness of the moment, but either way, there we were, sitting across from each other at a candlelit table in a restaurant that smelled like garlic and fresh bread, with soft music playing somewhere overhead, and the very specific weight of 2 people who had never once voluntarily chosen to be in the same room together. 1 hour, she said. Not warm, not cold, plain. The way someone signs a form they did not fill out themselves. 1 hour, I agreed. Then we go home and this does not need to be discussed again. Correct. We picked up our menus. I stared at the pasta section without reading a single word on it. From behind the top of her menu, without looking up, she said, "Stop looking at me. I am reading the menu. You are looking at me over the menu. I am checking that you are still breathing." There was a pause. A real pause, the kind that has weight. That, she said slowly, is a strange thing to say. This is a strange situation. Another pause, shorter. "Fair point," she said. "And I want to tell you something about that moment, because it matters more than it sounds." It was 2 words. Fair point. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would stand out in any conversation between 2 normal people. But between me and Patricia, one who had spent 3 years of holiday dinners and birthday gatherings existing on opposite sides of careful, polite distance, it was the first real thing either of us had said to the other in all that time. Not performed. Not managed. Just honest. The air between us shifted. Barely, but enough. Marco returned and took our orders. I got the pasta. Patricia ordered salmon with the dressing on the side. Of course she did. Marco beamed at us like we had said something delightful and swept away toward the kitchen. I broke a piece of bread. She broke a piece of bread. We did not speak for almost a full minute. Then she put her bread down and looked at me in a way she had never looked at me across any of those holiday dinner tables. Not assessing. Not guarded. More like she was genuinely trying to work out who I was, now outside the frame she had always held me in. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" She considered it. "Less like you are trying to convince someone of something." That hit somewhere I was not expecting. Because she was right. And the fact that she had noticed it, after 3 years of what I thought was careful inattention, made me wonder what else she had been noticing all along. I did not have an answer, so I took another piece of bread and said nothing. And somehow, in that silence, the evening stopped being something I was trying to survive and started being something else entirely. Something I could not yet name. Something I was not at all prepared for. Here is what nobody tells you about an evening that starts this badly. Sometimes it does not end the way you expect. We were 30 minutes into our one agreed hour, and the salmon had arrived, and the pasta had arrived, and Marco had refilled our water glasses with the ceremony of someone performing a ritual, and somewhere between the bread basket and the main course, something between Patricia and me had quietly, almost invisibly, started to loosen. It was not comfortable. I want to be clear about that. There was still enough history in the air between us to fill the entire restaurant. But it had shifted from something sharp to something more like the feeling you get when you walk into a room after an argument that nobody has officially resolved. Tense, but breathable. She was the one who asked the first real question. She set her fork down, folded her hands on the edge of the table, and looked at me steadily. "During the marriage," she said, "all those dinners, all those visits, I always felt like you were watching me, waiting for me to do something wrong. Like you had already decided how I was going to be judged before I ever had a proper chance." I kept my voice even. Was I right? The question sat between us. She did not look away. She did not reach for her glass. She just held the question there, in the space between the candle and the flower vase, and let it stay. Finally she said, "No. You were not wrong." She looked down at the table. "But you were not seeing the full picture either." "Then show me the full picture," I said. She took a breath. The kind of breath that comes before something a person has been holding on to for a long time. She told me about her daughter. Not the version you hear at family gatherings, not the polished summary. The real version. She said she had watched her daughter for years before I came along. Had watched the pattern repeat itself again and again. Her daughter would find someone who genuinely cared about her, would let them in just far enough, and then, reliably, she would find a reason to push them away. Not dramatically, quietly, the way a door drifts shut in a breeze. It happened with friends. It happened with her father before he left. It happened, eventually, with Patricia herself. When her daughter brought me home the first time, Patricia said she saw the way I looked at her. She said she knew in that moment exactly what kind of man I was and exactly what kind of ending was waiting for me. And she did not know how to tell that to a man she had only just met. So she kept her distance. She told herself she was being neutral. What she was actually doing was something most people do after they have been hurt enough times. She was protecting the part of herself that could not afford to watch it happen again. You were never the problem, she said. I want you to know that clearly. You were never the thing I was worried about. I sat with that for a long moment. 2 years after the divorce, I had spent more time than I would admit going back over things, pulling at threads, trying to understand what I had done wrong, what I had missed, where the gap between us had opened. And here was Patricia across a table at Marcello's on a Friday night she had not planned, handing me the answer in the quietest possible voice, like it had always been true and she had simply been waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. You were protecting yourself, I said, from watching it happen again. She looked at me with something I had never seen on her face in all the years I had known her. A kind of openness. Not performed composure. Not careful distance. Something real underneath. Perhaps, she said, I could have simply told you that from the beginning. Would I have listened? I asked. I opened my mouth and then closed it again. Probably not, I admitted. No, she said quietly. People rarely do when they are already inside something. What she was describing is a thing most people who have lived through real loss understand without being able to name it. When you have been left before, when you have watched something fall apart that you were sure would hold, your body learns to start grieving before the ending comes. It is not a choice. It is a habit built out of survival. The problem is that the habit does not only protect you. It also keeps you from being fully present for the things that are actually in front of you. I had never once considered that Patricia might have been doing that with me. Marco arrived with something we had not ordered. A small tiramisu, set between us on a white plate, and a wink, and the words on the house for a beautiful evening. He was gone before either of us could explain that this was not what it looked like. We looked at the tiramisu. We looked at each other. This does not mean anything, I said. Obviously, she agreed. She picked up a spoon. I picked up a spoon. And here is what I remember most about that moment. Not the dessert, not the candle, not the music playing somewhere in the background. I remember that she smiled. A real smile. Not the kind she wore at Christmas dinners. Not polite or managed or designed to occupy the right amount of space. An actual unguarded smile, the kind that happens before a person can decide whether to let it. It did something to the air in the room that I was not ready for. We stayed at that table past 9. Well beyond the 1 hour we had both agreed to and neither of us had mentioned since. When Marco brought the bill, he looked genuinely sad that the evening was ending. He thanked us warmly. I tipped him more than I usually would. Outside on the pavement, the night had cooled. A few other couples moved past us toward the car park. Patricia pulled her wrap top a little closer against the air, and we stood there for a moment without any particular reason to keep standing there. That was not what I expected, she said. No, I said. It was not. She looked at me with those calm eyes, and for a moment, just one moment, she looked like someone who was genuinely uncertain what to do next. Not in a troubled way. In the way a person looks when something has surprised them in a direction they were not prepared for. Good night, James, she said. Just my name. Simple and soft and nothing like the way she had said it across crowded rooms for years. That version had always been a little formal, a little clipped, the way you say the name of someone you are maintaining a respectful distance from. This was different. This landed in a completely different place. I watched her walk to her car. I watched her drive away. And I stood in that car park for longer than I should have, hands in my pockets, staring at the empty space where her car had been, with something turning over slowly in my chest that I could not explain and was not yet willing to name. I did something on Sunday night that I am not proud of. I sat on my couch, picked up my phone, opened a new message to Patricia, typed out 3 different sentences, deleted all 3 of them, and then put the phone face down on the cushion beside me like it had personally offended me. I did this 4 times. The 4th time, I left the phone on the kitchen counter and went to bed. I stared at the ceiling for an hour and 20 minutes. I know the exact number because I checked the clock twice. By Monday morning, I had convinced myself completely. Friday night was a strange situation handled reasonably well by 2 adults who had no other choice. That was all it was. That was the full story. I got dressed, drove to Hartley and Cross, grabbed a coffee from the second-floor machine, and walked to my desk like a man who had absolutely nothing unusual sitting in the back of his mind. Then Brendan appeared in my doorway. He did not knock. He leaned against the frame with his arms folded and that specific look on his face, the one that means he has already assembled the information and is simply waiting for you to fill in the last piece. "Marcelo's," he said. "Friday night. Someone from the contracts team was there. Corner table. Said you looked very relaxed for 2 people who were not on a date." I kept my eyes on my screen. I told him he had the wrong story. He sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited and crossed one leg over the other. "She was not exactly a stranger, was she?" he said. The way he said it told me he already knew more than he was showing. I looked at him directly. "Drop it," I said. He held both hands up, stood, and left. But the damage was already running. By 10 o'clock, I had noticed 3 separate people hold their eyes on me a half-second too long when I passed them in the corridor. Office whispers do not travel loudly. They move like smoke, thin and quiet, slipping under doors and through gaps. And by the time you smell it, the whole floor already knows. I could handle the whispers. What I was not prepared for was turning the corner near the 3rd-floor conference room at 10:30 and walking almost directly into Patricia. She was carrying a folder in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, moving at that steady, unhurried pace that had always suggested she had every minute of her day accounted for. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a pale blouse and her hair was pulled back cleanly. She looked exactly like she always looked at the office. Composed, controlled, like Friday night had taken place in a completely different universe. She saw me. 1/2 second. That was all. Something crossed her face. Something quick and real. The kind of expression that arrives before a person can decide whether to let it show. Then it was gone. She gave me the most professionally neutral nod I had ever received from another human being and kept walking without breaking her pace. I stood in that corridor for a moment after she passed. I went back to my desk. I rewrote the same paragraph of a client report 4 times. None of the 4 versions made any sense. I kept going back to that half-second. What I had seen in her face before the composure came back. I could not name it exactly, but I knew it was not nothing. Here is a thing most people learn eventually, usually the hard way. The version of someone you think you know is built from the moments they let you see. But the real shape of a person shows up in the half-seconds. In the unguarded flickers they did not plan on giving you. Patricia had spent years giving me the managed version. Friday night had shown me something else. And that half-second in the corridor told me she had not stopped thinking about it either. By 6 that evening I was home, standing at the kitchen counter, picking up my phone and putting it back down again. I made dinner. I ate it standing up without tasting it. I washed the dishes slowly. I turned the television on and watched nothing. At 7:40 I picked up the phone and typed before I could argue myself out of it. I told her I was sorry if the weekend had made things awkward at work. That I had not thought through how it might land on Monday, that I did not want to make anything harder for her than it needed to be. I put the phone face down on the counter. I checked it 9 times in the next 15 minutes. Her reply came on the 10th. She said she was sorry too, that the hallway nod had been cold and that was not fair to me. Then she said something that stopped me where I was standing. She said she had spent most of the weekend trying to file Friday night into a category that made practical sense. She said she could not find one. She said she had never done this before, meaning reach toward something that had a real chance of getting complicated, wanting something that everything logical said to leave alone. I read that message 3 times. There is a difference between someone saying they like you and someone admitting they cannot stop thinking about you even when they have tried. The first one is easy. The second one costs something. Patricia was not a person who spent words carelessly. Every sentence she wrote or said was deliberate, which meant that message had taken something out of her to send. I wrote back carefully. I told her we did not have to solve all of it tonight. That slow was completely fine with me if slow meant we kept talking. That careful was not a problem. It was actually the only way I knew how to do anything worth doing. The 3 small dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then she wrote back 4 words. Slow but moving forward. I sat down on the couch with my phone still in my hand and I stopped fighting it. I did not know what the shape of this was going to be. I did not know how any of it was supposed to work given the history and the office and everything else sitting between us. But I was not walking away from it. And that felt like the first honest decision I had made in a long time. We texted every evening that week. Small things at first. She sent me a photo of a vinyl record she found at a weekend market and said it reminded her of something she had not thought about in years. I told her about a sandwich I made for lunch that went badly wrong, and somehow that became a 40-minute conversation about her mother's cooking, and a summer she had spent in Portugal in her late 20s before everything in her life got serious and structured and fully scheduled. I had known this woman for 4 years. I had stood across from her at family dinners and holiday gatherings and carefully managed conversations. And I had never once heard her talk about Portugal. That was the thing that kept landing on me. How much of her I had never actually seen. How the version I had been shown, or the version I had been allowed, was only one small part of a much larger person. By the 2nd week, the texts had become phone calls. By the 3rd week, those calls were running past midnight without either of us acknowledging it. Then she mentioned, almost as a side note at the end of a Wednesday night call, a coffee place near the park on Garfield Street. Good coffee, she said. Quiet. Not somewhere people from the office usually go. I noticed that detail immediately. Not somewhere people from the office usually go. She had already thought about it. She had already picked somewhere safe. I said yes without hesitating. Saturday, I arrived 5 minutes early and spent those 5 minutes telling myself this was just 2 adults having a normal conversation in a normal place. She walked through the door, saw me at the table by the window, and smiled. Not the office smile. Not the composed, appropriate, occasion-specific smile I had cataloged across years of family events. A real one arrived before she could think about it. My whole prepared speech dissolved on the spot. We talked for 3 hours. Not about work or her daughter or the divorce or any of the furniture that usually sat between us. We talked about books and bad films and what she had wanted to be at 22 and what I quietly gave up when I stopped chasing it. At some point, the coffee went cold and neither of us touched it. Walking out onto Garfield Street afterward, the afternoon had completely gotten away from us. She said she had not talked like that in a long time. I told her neither had I. We stood on the pavement for a moment, neither of us moving toward our cars, and the air had that specific weight. The kind where something is either about to be said or deliberately held back, and both options feel equally heavy. Then she asked me something I was not expecting at all. She asked whether I thought her daughter knew. I did not answer straight away. It was a fair question. It was also a complicated one. My ex-wife and I had not been in regular contact since the divorce. Things between us had not ended with any real cruelty, but they had not ended cleanly either. There were still things sitting in corners that neither of us had gone back to move. I told Patricia honestly that I did not know. That it had not come up. That I was not sure when or how that conversation would happen. She nodded slowly. It will come up, she said. These things always do eventually. She was not wrong. And the fact that she had asked told me she was already thinking several steps ahead. She was not being impulsive about this. She was doing what she always did, thinking clearly about cost, about consequence, about what honesty required before moving forward. That is its own kind of courage, actually. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that sits down and looks at the hard parts directly instead of hoping they will sort themselves out. We said goodbye on Garfield Street and drove home separately, and I spent the whole ride with that question still sitting in the passenger seat beside me. Not because it scared me away, but because it was real. This whole thing was real and getting more real by the day, and the comfortable distance I had kept between myself and anything that mattered too much was no longer doing its job. That evening she sent me one line. Today was good. Really good. I wrote back immediately. Yeah, it was. Then a second message. Just one question. She asked if I was sure about this. Not in a doubtful way. In the way people ask when they are hoping the answer is yes but are too honest to assume it. I thought about 3 hours at a table by a window. I thought about Portugal and the vinyl record and the smile she had not planned on giving me when she walked through the door. I thought about the half second in the corridor and how long it had stayed with me. Then I typed back that I had not been this sure about anything in years. My phone was quiet for a little while. Then 2 words came back. Me too. I need to tell you about the Tuesday night she showed up at my door, because it was not what I expected, and it told me more about who Patricia when actually was than anything that had happened between us up to that point. It started with a phone call at 8:47. Her name on the screen. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Not because I was playing it cool, but because I genuinely needed 2 seconds to decide how my voice was going to sound when I answered. She asked if she could come over. Her voice was quiet. Not the professional quiet she used at the office. A different kind. The kind that has weight behind it. I said yes. I went to the kitchen and stood there with nothing useful to do with my hands. I washed a glass that was already clean. I checked my phone twice even though I was holding it. 14 minutes later, a knock at the door. She was standing there in the same burgundy wrap top from our coffee on Garfield Street. Bag still on her shoulder, like she had come straight from wherever the evening had taken her without stopping. No armor. No carefully arranged expression. Just Patricia, looking like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and had finally decided tonight was the night to put it down. I stepped back and let her in. She walked into the living room and stopped in the middle of it. She looked around slowly, like the room needed a moment before she did. Then she said, "I handled something badly today and I needed to say that to you in person." I told her she did not have to do that. She said, "I do. Let me." So I let her. She told me about a junior analyst at Hartley and Cross named Callum, 24 years old, 8 months into the job. He had made a documentation error on the Caldwell account. Not a catastrophic one, but significant enough that it needed to be addressed formally. Instead of coming forward, Callum had tried to quietly patch it himself and hope no one noticed. Someone noticed. Patricia found out that afternoon and her response had been sharp. Sharper than the situation required. She had gone into that conversation leading with consequence rather than with understanding, and by the time she walked out she already knew that she had handled it wrong. She sat with it for the rest of the afternoon and eventually she traced it back to its real source. She had not been reacting to Callum's mistake. She had been reacting to what the mistake reminded her of. The feeling of discovering that someone you trusted had been quietly hiding something instead of just telling you the truth. She had felt that before. She had lived inside that feeling for a long time after her marriage ended. And her body had remembered it faster than her mind could catch up. Every time something starts to crack, she said, my first instinct is to close it off. Cut the damage before it spreads. The account. Callum. She paused. You. That last word sat quietly between us in my living room. What she was describing is something that a lot of people who have been through real loss carry without realizing it. When someone leaves or lies or disappears, your nervous system takes notes. It builds a response that is designed to make sure that particular kind of pain never catches you off guard again. The response feels like strength from the inside. It feels like being smart, being careful, being someone who does not get caught out twice. But from the outside, and sometimes from the inside too if you are honest enough to look, it can end up hurting people who were never part of the original story. Knowing that about yourself is genuinely difficult. Most people never get there. Patricia was standing in my living room at 9 in the evening because she had gotten there that afternoon, and she was not willing to let it sit overnight without addressing it. What are you going to do about Callum? I asked. She had already drafted it on her phone in the parking garage beneath my building. Formal caution. Supervised check-ins for 60 days. A written plan with clear benchmarks. Fair, structured, without the sharpness from earlier in the day. You did that in the parking garage, I said. She looked slightly uncomfortable for the first time all evening. I was downstairs for about 20 minutes, she said. I did not know how to knock. I came very close to laughing. I kept it together. You could have just called from down there, I said. I thought about it, she said. Felt like the wrong way to do this. There was a quiet between us then that was not empty. It was the kind of quiet that arrives after something true has been said and the room needs a moment to adjust around it. I went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water because I needed to do something with the feeling building in my chest. I brought one to her. She took it with both hands and held it like she was not sure what to do with the gesture. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You were going to ask anyway," she said. "Back then, during the marriage, all those years of dinners and gatherings and careful distance. I used to feel like you had already written a verdict about me before I had a chance to say anything in my defense. Was that real or was I reading it wrong?" She looked down at the glass. A long pause, the longest of the evening, because, she said finally, "You were the first person my daughter ever brought home who looked at her like she was genuinely worth something. And I was terrified of what would happen to you when she could not hold on to it." I did not say anything. "I pushed you away," she said, "because I was frightened of what it meant if you were actually a good man. It is a terrible thing to admit out loud." "It is an honest thing to admit," I said. She looked up at me then, and the expression on her face was something I had never seen from her before across all the years I had known her. Not composed, not managed, not performing steadiness for a room full of people. Just open. Genuinely, quietly open, the way a person looks when they have stopped protecting something and are not sure yet what that feels like. "I do not entirely know what I am doing," she said softly. "I want to be clear about that. I am not good at this." "Neither am I," I said. "You seem like you are," she said. "I washed a clean glass 3 times waiting for you to get here," I said. She laughed. A short, real, completely unplanned laugh that she did not see coming and could not have stopped. And just like that, the room felt smaller in the best possible way. We sat down on the couch and kept talking. Not about Callum or the Caldwell account or the office implications of anything. Real things. She told me about flying home from a solo trip to Portugal 2 years ago and crying on the plane, not because anything had gone wrong, but because it was the first time in years she had felt fully like herself, and she did not know what to do with the fact that it had taken going somewhere completely alone to find that. I told her about the 6 months after the divorce when I ate cereal 4 nights a week and told myself every single morning that I was handling everything fine. Right up until the evening I was genuinely not fine and realized I had no one I felt comfortable enough to call. She listened the way people listen when they are not waiting for their turn to speak. Without filling the gaps. Without redirecting it back to herself. Just present. By the time we noticed the hour, it was past midnight. She stood and reached for her bag. "I should go," she said. I walked her to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back. "For what it is worth," she said, "I think you handled today better than I did." "We both could have done better," I said. She nodded. Then she looked at me one last time with that open expression that still caught me off guard no matter how many times I saw it now. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Patricia." She left. I closed the door. The glass she had been holding was still on the coffee table. I left it exactly where it was. I did not sleep much that night, not because anything was wrong, but because something was becoming very right and I had not yet worked out how to hold that without gripping it too tight. 2 days later, everything got significantly more complicated. I was at my desk at 9 in the morning when an email arrived from Richard Holt, the senior partner at Hartley & Cross. Richard had been in this industry for 30 years and had the kind of presence that made entire corridors go quiet when he appeared. The subject line was 5 words. "We need to speak this morning." I read it twice, closed my laptop, looked at the wall for a moment. By 9:30, I was sitting across from him in his corner office on the top floor. The whole city spread out gray and wide through the glass behind him. On the desk between us was a printed copy of the incident report from the Caldwell account. Patricia's report. The one she had drafted in the parking garage beneath my building 2 nights ago. "I have been made aware," Richard said, "of how the documentation issue on the Caldwell account was handled." He was not angry. That was somehow the most unsettling part. "I have also been made aware that the response involved coordination between yourself and Patricia Hale outside of professional hours." I kept my expression steady. He looked at me with the patience of someone who had navigated complicated situations for 3 decades and found very few of them genuinely surprising. "I am not here to make accusations," he said. I am here because two people I respect made a judgment call on a personnel matter, and I want to understand the decision before I decide how I feel about it. I walked him through all of it. The timeline, Callum's error, Patricia's initial response, and what she had recognized about it afterward. The corrective plan she had drafted. The documentation structure. I left nothing out. Richard was quiet for a moment when I finished. The plan is sound, he said. Thank you, I said. The situation around it is not ideal, he said. I understand that. He folded his hands on the desk. She came to me this morning, he said, before I sent you that email. She was in this office at 8 o'clock and she told me everything herself. She asked me to direct any concerns to her and to leave you out of it entirely. She told me the original call was hers and that you had raised questions and she had made the final determination. I went completely still. That was not entirely accurate and she knew it and she had said it anyway. Richard looked at me for a long moment. I have worked with Patricia for 2 years, he said. She does not make careless statements. Which tells me something about the situation. He paused. It also tells me something about you, that she felt it was worth saying. He dismissed me with a nod and told me to keep Callum's progress carefully documented going forward. I walked out into the corridor and stood with my back against the wall for a moment. She had walked into Richard Holt's office at 8 in the morning and stepped in front of it before I even knew there was anything coming. Not because it was the strategically smart move. Not because anyone had told her to. Because she had decided that something she had helped create was not going to become a problem I carried by myself. I found her on the 4th floor near the end of the morning, standing at the printer with a stack of documents and a coffee that looked like it had been refilled more than once. She had gone straight from my apartment to the office without stopping home. Same wrap top. She looked up when she heard me. Richard told me, I said quietly. I figured he would, she said. You did not have to do that. I know, she said. Simply. Without drama. The way someone says a thing they have already fully made peace with. I looked at her standing there in the fluorescent office light, documents in hand, completely unbothered, and I thought about all the different versions of this woman I had encountered across the years. The composed figure at Christmas dinners. The carefully distant presence at family gatherings. The woman who laughed at Marcello's and looked surprised by her own laughter. The woman who sat in a parking garage writing corrective documentation before she knew how to knock on my door. Lunch, I said. Not the building cafeteria. Somewhere with actual food. Something softened at the corner of her mouth. I have a call at 1, she said. 12:15, I said. 2 blocks over. Nobody from this floor goes there. She held my gaze for a second. Then she nodded. We went to a small Italian place called Rinaldi's that I had eaten at alone more times than I wanted to count. Corner table. No candles this time, just good pasta and afternoon light coming through the window and the kind of easy noise that makes a private conversation feel more private. She told me that after she had left my apartment 2 nights ago, she had lain awake going over everything. By 6 in the morning, she had already decided what she needed to do. She said she was not going to let something they had built together become a weight that only one person carried. That is not how this works, she said. Not if we are actually doing this properly. And are we, I said, doing this properly? She broke a piece of bread and looked at it for a moment. I think I am trying to, she said. That is the most honest answer I have right now. That is enough, I said. Is it really, she said. It is more than most people offer, I said. We stayed at that table longer than either of us planned. Her 1 o'clock call became a 3 o'clock. Neither of us mentioned it until we were already most of the way through dessert. She laughed when she checked her phone. I told her it was worth rescheduling for. She said there was no fee for rescheduling. I said there should be. Walking back to the building afterward, 2 blocks through cool afternoon air with the city moving around us in every direction. She stopped at the entrance and turned to me with an expression I had been trying to find the right word for since that first night at Marcello's. It was not happiness exactly. It was something more careful than that. Something that understood what the road here had cost and was not pretending otherwise. I need to say something, she said. Okay, I said. I spent a long time being very good at not needing people, she said. I was proud of it. I thought it made me strong. She looked at the pavement for a moment. I do not think that anymore. I did not fill the silence because nothing I could have said would have fit inside that moment without making it smaller. I am not saying I have any of this figured out, she said. I am saying I want to figure it out with you. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. I reached out and took her hand. Right there on the pavement outside the building where we both worked, with people visible through the lobby glass, and I did not think about it for even half a second. Then we figure it out, I said. She looked down at our hands, then back up at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not look like someone quietly preparing for the next thing to fall apart. She looked like someone who had finally decided it was safe to let something be good. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I said. We walked back inside. Separate lifts, different floors, same building. Nothing was announced. Nothing needed to be. Some things do not require a stage to be real. They just need two people who have stopped running in opposite directions and decided quietly to move the same way instead. That evening I sat in my apartment with the city outside the window going about its business, and I thought about the strange and unlikely path that had led to all of this. A blind date that was never supposed to happen. A woman I had spent years misreading. A hard conversation in a parking garage and a living room and a corner office that had each, in their own way, showed us both what we were actually made of. I was not waiting anymore for the good thing to break. I was just letting it be good. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.